Hi, my name is Jessica Britton and I live in the state of Massachusetts. I don't normally do videos like this, but I felt, given kind of what happened yesterday, I think it's important that we as citizens, residents, taxpayers of Massachusetts and parents, that we get our voices heard. So on Tuesday of this week, which was June 3rd, 2025, we had gotten notification that there was going to be a subcommittee hearing from the Massachusetts Joint Committee on Public Health, that they were going to be conducting a hybrid meeting, which would be in person or virtual, for Friday, June 6th, from 10 to 5. You were needed to sign up by Wednesday, 5 o'clock, June 4th. So we were given about 24 hours notice in order to sign up if we were going to be able to, be virtual or in person on that Friday. So we had a really short turnaround. But there were a lot of people that are against some of the bills that were proposed in the subcommittee. So I'll list them off and kind of give you a little rundown. First one is S1618. It's an act promoting community immunity. And basically this one is by Senator Rebecca Rausch. And it would allow minors to consent to preventative care, including vaccination, without parents' consent or knowing. It would also allow daycares, private daycare schools, colleges to refuse religious exemptions and impose additional vaccine requirements that are typically not required by DPH, such as COVID-19. Subject both the religious and medical exemptions to a state board, so they want to license our religious exemption status. Grant DPH expansive authority to change immunizations and exemption requirements. Require doctors to sign religious exemptions. So this one was, pretty thorough on taking away any of our medical freedom rights. The other two bills, S1557, an act relative to vaccines and preventing future disease outbreaks, and SH2554 is an act relative to routine childhood vaccinations. And basically with those two, they were looking at removing religious exemptions to vaccination in order to attend Massachusetts schools. So, not right. I think in any state that removes religious exemptions or your right to practice religious freedom in however you see fit is against the Constitution and against our civil rights. And what I wanted to kind of share with you is some of the information that I took an area into learning during the pandemic, which was sovereignty. And so there's a couple of books that I feel are super helpful. And I think at this point, we might have to use the sovereignty route, just because our legislators have sold us out and the bankers are coming to foreclose on us, basically. So one book I think is really great is Something is Wrong. And that's An American Affidavit of Probable Cause, and it's by Anna Maria Retzinger and James Clinton Belcher. So this one is a good primer to kind of give you an idea of how the United States Corporation versus the original states of the United, as we're united, States of America was formed. And basically, if you go back to like the birth certificate system, if you think about like the birth certificate system, when you're born, you're in the hospital, you get like a certificate of birth, and you also get a social security card. And that social security card is your worker card, which basically ties you to taxes and any kind of social security benefits you'll get later on down the road, which we know. I was born in the 70s. I'm not going to get any. The system is bankrupt, which has been bankrupt for a long time. So good areas to kind of give yourself a primer on what's going on and how you can reclaim your rights under the original Constitution. The other one that I don't know if you guys ever did any Cliff Notes in school for books, but some good highlight Cliff Notes. There's about 3 of them. I got these on Amazon a couple of years ago. This one's called The UCC Connection, How to Free Yourself from Legal Tyranny. This helped me write my speech for the hearing, but I was never called. There was about, I don't know, 100 people, 125 people in the virtual room that were still waiting to be called. They went to, I think, about 5:30, and they just said, that's it. And there were a lot of people in person that were never called. So, while it sucks that we didn't get to be heard on the record, we can at least submit some type of written testimony in, which I still plan on doing. I believe we have to submit it by this Monday, June 10th. One of the other books that I think is really great, and it helped me write my speech, is the Common Law Handbook. And this is that 3-pack for jurors, sheriffs, bailiffs, and justices. And this will kind of help you understand the court system, which I used in my speech. And then the third book, what the heck did I do with that? Is Your Straw Man, which I don't see it over here. Oh, here it is. Meet Your Straw Man, or whatever you want and whatever you want to know. So, yeah, your straw man is your paper identity. It's your name on your birth certificate, on your social security card that is all written in caps. It's your fictional paper version of you. You are the flesh in human form. And one of the other things I'll mention is before the social security system, which I believe started in the 30s, people wrote their names in their births were, well, it should be the social security system was started in the 30s, but people wrote their names in Bibles as to track their lineage and their births. All right, so let me get into this. I wrote a speech basically going off of what I've read and what I understand. And there are a lot of constitutional people that know it a lot better than I do. So I'll read you what I had. And there's one thing I want to point out. If you go back to listen to Senator Rebecca Rausch's speech, she'll state like a lot of facts that are embellished. And I don't even think they're really facts. Like when she talks about, how health measures such as vaccines have like eradicated diseases and cured different things. If you go back to like when she stated in the 1900s, people still had horse and buggy. And there was a lot of poop in the streets that they had to get rid of. And there was very poor sanitation. And that's what caused a lot of the diseases. If you actually do your research, you'll see that, as we went throughout like the 1900s, the 20th century, and we had sanitation and clean water and just, how do I want to say? We had better living conditions, then disease went down. So, and if you actually do your research on what's in the vaccines and what happens after childhood vaccination, or even look into like Andrew Molden, he kind of went missing after he exposed a lot of stuff. He was like a neuroscientist, psychologist. Yeah, look him up. Andrew Molden. He was Canadian. All right. So I'll read you guys. Oh, so before I go into that, so one of the things when Rebecca Rausch was talking about her case for her community immunity bills, she talked about statutory policy. So statutory policy falls under the Admiralty jurisdiction, which is maritime law. And that is the separate judicial system that runs in conjunction with our original constitutional rights that we had. And it's been subverted, and a lot of the courts have been subverted with it too. So you have to know how to talk as you are under your constitutional rights. So that's my preface. So I'll go on. I would like to confirm that my testimony today is being recorded and will be placed on the record. So that's another thing that you want to make sure when you're in court, is that you're always on a court of record, that there's a stenographer that's going to be recording everything that's said, because once it's made on the public record, it has to be followed the constitutional way. All right, I'll go on. As elected public officials or servants, you took an oath to the Constitution in the state of Massachusetts Constitution. But I ask, what Constitution do you follow? Common law, which is the original, or the international maritime law under Admiralty jurisdiction? What jurisdiction is empowering yourselves to pass public policy versus public law? And as I mentioned, she talked about statutory. So statutory is that Admiralty. I guess that's why there's been such a big push for many decades for a separation of church and state. You see, the original Constitution was founded on common law, which is based on God's laws, which is the right to enjoy our individual freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of personal property, as long as you don't infringe on other people's rights. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to law, for it is the author and the source of law. And that is from case Yik Wu versus Hopkins. So I find it contradictory that you are trying to take away our religious freedoms in Massachusetts, one of the original 13 colonies of the original Union, an attempt to license our freedoms through a religious exemption registry. Number one, the Constitution is the supreme law, and any statute in contradiction is fiction of law, null and void. One famous case is Marbury versus Madison. No courts are bound to uphold, and no citizen is bound to obey. That's in there too. So when they do push this out, just know you do not have to obey. Legislators cannot legislate the behavior of the people. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. And that's Miranda versus Arizona case law. Number 4, all codes, rules, and regulations are for the government authorities only, not for the human or the creator, in accordance with God's law. And that's Rodriguez versus Ray Donovan. Number 5, the common law is the real law in the supreme law of the land. And that is Self versus Ray, which is RHAY. Number 6, the law of supremacy, which means that it goes in a hierarchical order. So it's the federal, then the state, and then the local powers. In that order is the law of supremacy. Number 7, States cannot license rights since a privilege is guaranteed by the federal Constitution and exists independently of the state's authority. No state can convert any secured liberty into a privilege and issue a license and a fee for it. If a state does convert your right, such as a religious exemption, into a privilege and licenses it for a fee, you can ignore the license and the fee and engage in the right without impunity. And that's Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. And there's also Shuttlesworth versus the City of Birmingham, Alabama case law that further reinstates that. So they cannot create this registry and have us register our religious exemptions or have a doctor sign off on it. Those are our rights under common law, the federal Constitution. Number 8, and I have the right to sue anyone that violates my constitutional rights, and that is in there too. What we have here is the color of law. Color in this terminology means counterfeit, not genuine, but having the resemblance of, but is not. So USC 18, section 242, deprivation of rights under the color of law. Whoever under the color of law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom willfully subjects any person in any state to the deprivation of any rights shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. USC 42 S 1983, civil action for deprivation of rights. Every person who, under the color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state subjects, or causes to be subjected any person within this jurisdiction thereof to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution and laws shall be liable to the party injured in an action at law. So basically, we can sue these people for taking away our rights in practicing public policy versus public law. So here's another thing I think is very important. And so my speech was a little over 3 minutes. Right now we have the emergency powers, and it's been, since 2020 that they keep signing this state of emergency situation. So I'm going to read you something in the common law handbook for the jurors, sheriffs, and bailiffs that goes into that. So no emergency has just cause to suppress the Constitution. While an emergency cannot create power and no emergency justifies the violation of any of the provisions of the United States Constitution or state's constitution, public emergency, such as economic depression for especially liberal construction of constitutional powers, has been declared that because of national emergency. It is the policy of the courts of the times of the national peril so liberally to construe the special powers vested in the chief executive as to sustain and effectuate the purpose thereof, and to the end also more liberally to construe the constituted division and classification of the powers of the coordinate branches of the government, and insofar as may not be clearly consistent with the Constitution. So the Constitution must be construed to reference the common law, and that's when it kind of goes into any law that's in opposition of common law is fiction of law, and it's null and void. So that was one area I just wanted to kind of share, because I think people have been conditioned to just obey and follow the rules. And now we're seeing that things aren't making sense, and they haven't been making sense for a very long time, but now it's become very more blatant. So you need to realize you do not have to obey. You do have these rights, and you can defend yourself in a court of law if you follow the certain wordings that you have to represent yourself a particular way. So, and one other thing I'll mention, because I find this very interesting, is the federal zones. So, I don't know if you guys remember, like back in the day when you would send a letter, and like I live in Massachusetts, so we would say Mass, M-A-S-S. And then all of a sudden we got like these abbreviations, and it was just MA with the formal zip code. So those are federal designations. And that's what Congress created, those federal regions. So when you send stuff, you want to use the 4-letter or the 3-letter abbreviation versus what was, I want to say it was probably revamped in the 80s, because I feel like I was a kid when that kind of changed over. But the zip code is all part of that federal zoning. And once you read, like, you know something is wrong when you understand how things are really set up, and you are of the land that you're born. So instead of being Massachusetts state, you are born in the state of Massachusetts, and you are a resident of the state of Massachusetts. So yeah, there's a lot of nuances, but I'm gonna obviously kind of clean up my speech and email it in, because I think it's important to have it on the record that they can't circumvent our freedoms because they want to create public policy and regulate us like cattle. So if you watch this video to the end, I appreciate it, and good luck.